Psychology, ethology, human ethology. Rational solutions for emotional problems. Human behavior is so complex. In response to this dilemma, there are countless scientific areas attempting to try to explain certain areas. However, the final synthesis is still not accomplished at the present. After a short historical background, I would like to introduce the point of view of the biological approach, the so-called human ethology. Birth of psychology. Philosophers were thinking for hundreds of years. At the end of the 19th century, the first psychologist, Wundt, attempted to take psychology into the laboratory and make simple measurements like reaction times. By doing so, he attempted to make it approachable for science. Psychoanalysis. Some years later, the psychoanalytic movement started with a completely different attitude. They examined the unconscious psychic content and its role with the help of introspection, free association, and dream analysis. Except for the theorists themselves, their subjects were dominantly neurotic or mentally ill patients. Behaviorism. This was unacceptable for the accuracy preferring behaviorists, who questioned not just the unconscious but even the conscious psyche. First, only the possibility of its investigation with scientific methods. Later, even its pure existence as well. They've developed a very precise, controlled, repeatable experimental approach by which they improved their learning theory. The laboratory results were derived mostly from rat and mice experiences. They applied their conclusion to humans with little or no restrictions. Humanistic psychology. But the psychoanalysis and the behaviorism are deterministic in the sense that psychoanalysts claim that the instincts and the early experience determine the personality. The behaviorists claim that the stimuli-reaction type of learning is responsible for every observable behavior. In reaction to this determinism, the third force emerged in the history of psychology. The humanistic psychologists accept that basic instincts drive people, and they accept that learning plays an important role in shaping behavior. Overall, with these factors, they assume that the inner desire of self-actualization is the highest motivation for mankind. Fulfilling our own full potential, we are free to choose how to behave, how to think, more or less how to feel. With the birth of ethology, meanwhile, psychologists tried to figure out how neurotic psyche is working, or how to modify variables in an experimental situation to evoke behavioral changes, or try to sort out what motivates development in healthy individuals. Zoologists were wandering around in the wild in search of nature's laws. Some of their attention turned to the physical characteristics to the behavior of animals. Out in nature, they mostly met the inherited genetically fixed action patterns of the animals. In 1973, Konrad Lorenz, Nicholas Tinbergen, and Carl von Frisch won shared Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine for their animal behavior study. A new science was born. It's called ethology, the new science. Von Frisch translated the dance of honeybees. Tinbergen described the reproductive behavior hierarchy of three-spined stickleback, and Lorenz made distinctions between analog and homolog behavior during pattern during evolution. As zoologists, they never forgot about evolutionary background, and their emphasis was on the natural behavior in the natural environment. They focused on the physiological mechanisms, the individual development, the evolutionary origins, and the function of behavior. The fluent behavior has been split into separate elements, and the huge descriptive work of ethogram collection began. Ethogram is the inventory of all behavior patterns of all species. This descriptive ethology serves as a basis for determining species-specific patterns, making comparisons, and searching cause and effect laws and functions. Evolutionary background and practice. While behaviorists ran rats in labyrinth experiments and tried to figure out how rewards reinforce the labyrinth learning, ethologists drew the conclusion that through millions of years of evolution, rats lived in holes and burrows. Via natural selection, they adapted to that kind of environment. Therefore, their good learning performance was derived from their special adaptation. In another example, researchers wanted to compare two species in terms of intelligence and gave a detour assignment for squirrels and dogs. The squirrel achieved better. Based on that, they concluded it is more intelligent than a dog, which is not necessarily true. Before we conclude, in such broad categories like general intelligence, we need to consider that squirrels evolved to be tree-dwelling creatures. We need to find their path among narrow branches and calculate routes in 3 dimensions, generations over generations. The best were selected among them. Of course, they are better in detour using than a species which never had to go away first in order to approach their target. In printing studies, Lorenz discovered that when a duckling hatches, it immediately follows the first moving object. In nature, it's usually its mother. If by chance this is something else, the duckling follows faithfully. It works with anything about knee height. There is a short sensitive period when the image of the mother imprints the nervous system. After that, it is unchangeable and the works like genetically fixed pattern. And as the research progressed, it came to light that more or less every species has some kind of sensitive period after birth. By some bird species, it even leads to species identification, in the meaning that which species species they imprinted as hatchlings, they chose that species as a mate. Researchers also proved that imprinting plays a basic role by shaping mother-infant bond by mammals in different proportion and different fashion. By the first lick, the newborn smell is imprinted into the mother. Through the touches and nursing, the mother's smell and picture is irreversibly imprinted to the young. Behavioral characteristics also help guide this process. Zebras guide their foals away from mother mares after birth for some days until the image of the mother is fixed. In the wild, animals feed only on their young. Animals feed only their own young except for some, so recognizing someone's mother is essential. Naturally, the question arose, does the sensitive period exist with humans as well? In a less rigid fashion, the answer is yes. Investigations prove that a few hours after birth is very important. This is the time when newborn is very vigilant for good reason, if they are not overloaded by painkillers or other drugs via the mother's body. Differences in attachment could be shown even 10 years later, though in Western cultures the sterility is above all. Therefore, they took away the newborn from the mother immediately after birth, but even infections were lower in case where they had the possibility to stay in close contact for a while. Behavioral ecology. That is the branch of ethology that tries to find out the connection among certain behavior of a species and its physical or biological environment. They are thinking in terms like, what is the survival value of that particular behavior? Does it increase their inclusive fitness? How do certain environmental characteristics influence the behavior? In antelope, body size, food preference, and territory behavior, communication, anti-predatory behavior, the interconnectedness is clear. In the African savanna, a lot of antelope species are running around. The smallest is the rabbit-sized dick antelope. The biggest is the cow-sized eland. The small ones need high nutrient content leaves and buds. They are browsers, so they live in the forest. The sources are scarce and concentrated, so they defend their territory mostly in pairs. In the woods, they don't see each other, so they communicate with smell and hearing. They try to hide from predators at the other end. The bigger ones, such as the wildebeest, are satisfied with the low nutrient content grass. They are nomadic, following the seasonal rains. On the open savanna, they communicate with each other mainly with visual signals and aggregate or simply escape from predators. Not surprisingly, the middle-sized antelopes are mixed feeders, eating grass and leaves. They are somewhat territorial. In communication, they use smell, hearing, and visual elements and form heron groups. Naturally, there are some exemptions. The cause and effect are never straightforward. They grew long legs because they lived in open places, or they could go to open places because they already had long legs. They evolved together with their environment. Reproductive strategies. In biology, the main distinction has been made between male and female based on the size of their gametes. The female has a relatively small amount of large gametes. At the time when it's fertilized, the female already invested a lot into its offspring and doesn't want to lose any of them. In an opposite fashion, the male has a tremendous amount of relatively small gametes. Producing them is not so costly, so protecting only one is not cost effective. Because of that, the female's reproductive interest is to help the survival of all its fertilized eggs. The male's interest is to fertilize as many eggs as possible. In case of lots of species, females also mate with multiple partners because genetic variance is also beneficial for survival. But the situation is more complicated. The inclusive fitness depends on the offspring itself surviving until its reproductive age. The parent's main interest is to ensure the survival of their young. In the animal kingdom, we find different strategies for that. Among the invertebrates, most of them produce a vast amount of offspring, but then leave them on their own destiny. In the case of some fish, the father assumes for the care. However, with most mammals, the mothers are the caretaker. When only the mother or only the father is caretaker, the reproductive system is polygamous. They mate with multiple partners. Among the birds, we find polygamous and monogamous systems too. The accepted hypothesis is that in those circumstances when the chance of the youngster's survival is higher, when both parents take care, they do it so monogamy takes shape. In behavior ecology, monogamy means only that the pair stays together at least one season. It does not mean faithfulness. In some pairs, one of them desert, which can be the male or the female. Some try to mate with a neighboring animal. In all cases, we can count with the assessed cost-benefit proportion. What is the chance of having more offspring? Finding a new mate. Survival of the first offspring in case of leaving the first partner alone. Naturally, none said that those birds calculate that with clear awareness, but we assume that genes influence the reproductive behavior and evolutionary selected those genes and behavior forms that help to get more genes into the next generation. Does it mean anything for humans? Yes and no. It is very hard to compare. First of all, in behavioral ecology, monogamy has nothing to do with moral, only with the survival rate of the offspring. In human culture, this is a very sensitive topic. Second, we are speaking about species and probabilities, not individual stories. It might even be hurtful to compare animal behavior with our biggest heartache. Naturally, science does not intend to hurt anyone. Among human cultures, we also find different marital systems. In polygamous cultures, according to what we predict, based on the male-female biology, most men can have more wives. And there were only a few known cultures where women could have more than one husband. Also, there are all monogamous cultures where at least the expectation is to be faithful to your partner, more or less on both sides. But still, in the harems, usually there is one favorite wife who reminds us to be monogamous. In the monogamous cultures, we are full of examples for polygamous behavior. We have a good reason to assume that those behaviors are influenced by genes, and we could see the explanations for both kinds of behavior. It might be easier to understand ourselves if we accept that deep inside we have both tendencies. Most probably males lean on one side, females on the other. However, behavior ecology has never said that genetic background means any excuse for certain action. Independently from our genes, we are responsible for whatever we do. It either falls in the direction of what our genes predispose us to, or against it, not to mention that we can choose from opposite tendencies. Selfish gene. Someone said gene selection. Yes, Dawkins renewed the old natural selection concept and stated that it acts on the level of the gene. If it had worked on the level of an individual, according to the original version, the whole world should be a very selfish, hostile place, but it is not. Every step we meet altruism in nature. With other words, helping someone, even the disadvantage of its own. If eusocial insects' social life gave the first clue for an explanation. In some cases of ants, bees, and wasps, the whole sterile caste formed whose task is only to take care of the brood. Why don't they deal with their own reproduction? In their haplodiploid reproduction system, the workers have 75% common genes with their sisters and would only have 50% with their daughters. In selfish gene theory, they can pass more common genes in the next generation, so they increase their inclusive fitness. Similar ideas are working in case of mammals too. For instance, in a lion pride, most of the females are relatives. If they are mother, daughters, or siblings, they share 50% of their genes. If they are aunts or cousins, they share 25%, and so on. If an individual helps to survive one or more of its relatives through the past common genes, it might be increasing its own inclusive fitness. Altruism happens between non-related individuals as well. In most cases, researchers assume this is mutual altruism that implies more or less equal benefit for the two animals. All altruistic behavior can be explained if we suppose that our genes are under selection. Those genes pass in bigger number to the next generation, which more effectively helps survival of individuals with the same genes. Human ethology. So here we have a relatively young biological science dealing with observable natural behavior patterns, paying attention to the evolutionary background as well. Naturally, it can use humans as a subject of investigation. Initially, the comparative primate studies helped us gain more understanding. What makes us different from our closest relatives, the apes? From mostly plant-eating primates, we evolved to hunting-gathering humans. The group emerged at a higher significance than ever before, and the earlier competition was exchanged for cooperation. We had to synchronize our movements, our mental states, and even our emotions. A unique feature emerged possibly to support the group cohesion, which was empathy, hypnosis, rhythm, music, and dance. New cognitive structures shaped to serve with conflict resolution, and imitation became of higher importance in proportion than in any other animal group. In addition, the group loyalty increased in a level never witnessed before. High sociability resulted in strong support and help for injured, sick group members, which is also very scarce between animals. Only among highly social animals like elephants and dolphins are some reports being known. Sharing food happens usually only between mother and child and primates, while it's quite usual in humans. Before we became tool makers, we began an attraction to objects. Another unique feature of the human group is the complement work, which hasn't been seen among primates. People have an end product in their mind and share the task on an alternative way, which one was one part of the job and the other does the other. As a child, rearing time extended longer than in any other species. The mother, the father, even close relatives are helping in child rearing. Monogamy partly grounds the long common effort. Moreover, in the absence of the hunt, men secures and protects the personal structure of the group. One of our most prominent distinctions from the animal world was language. Naturally, human ethology supports the idea that language learning builds on the genetic background. It seems to have a wide sensitive period. Children until about 10 years learn the language differently than adults. In some sad situations, when children grow up without language exposure after the critical period, language learning was not perfect. In other examples, twins growing up with a deaf grandmother created their own language, which shows its genetic base. In communication, not only the development of language is unique, way before speech, humans had about 250 different facial expressions in sharp contrast to 20 to 30 signs in the cases of apes. All facial expression of emotions was recognizable for all cultures in the same way. For example, everywhere people shortly lift their eyebrows when they see an acquaintance, smile without showing the teeth aims to decrease the aggression of the other, while laugh can be playful aggression with the meaning, what's happening now is not serious. We also can pretend those signs, but if it is genuine, it takes a fraction of a second. If they are pretended, they usually last slightly longer. We produce body language as a bigger part unconsciously, but its influence on our behavior is enormous. Some even state that the information flows in 80% or more by body language, 15% vocalization like tone, speed of speech, pitch, and verbal communication is responsible only for the last 5%. The expressions of aggression are also universal, but in the intensity, cultural differences make a huge impact. Filming among Bushmen, researchers didn't find any aggressive gestures until they used a camera that filmed in the back of the cameraman. Only then they could reveal that children put their tongue out and showed their butt at the back of the filmmakers. But that was all signs of aggression and only came from children. In the Bushman culture, parents educate the young ones not to behave aggressively. They help to resolve conflicts, encourage peaceful behavior. On the opposite side, the South American Yanomamo tribe is famous for their aggressive culture. They straightly teach their children how to bully, and they treat each other aggressively. These examples show us that the cultural learning builds onto the minimal, universal genetic predisposition and exaggerate or lessen it significantly. Attachment theory. Although Freud and Jung stated a long time ago the important role of the early experience plays in individual development, the other branches of psychology and the biological science were late to prove it. In the middle of the 20th century, proof began to flow from more sides. The mother-child relationship is the basis for the formation of the personality. Moreover, it serves as a model for later relationships. It reminds us to the imprinting in the first few months of special bond forms between mother and child, which later elaborated into a sophisticated connection, communication style, and attitude towards significant people. The ways we connect and the communication with our mother basically influences our later relationships. And don't be misled, first the dependency needs had to be satisfied. Only after can the independence come. If you hurry independence, it can easily end up at the opposite. Pushing children too early to gain independence can cause late clinging on the never received security. Mary Ainsworth worked out the strange situation test and measure attachment type. She invited mother and father and their 1.5 children into a room where toys and a stranger were waiting for them. Usually the children engaged with themselves with the toys. In consecutive episodes, the child was left alone with the stranger, later all alone. This caused distress for them, serious for some. The actual measurement happened in the reunion episodes, basically with method of ethology, coding behavior elements. The researchers could differentiate 3 types. Securely attached children showed strong distress. They cried, fuss, went to the door, and so on. When the mother came back, they ran to her, picked up eye contact and bodily contact immediately. They were easily made comfortable, and soon they went back to play. Ambivalent, insecurely attached children demonstrated huge distress when mom disappeared. They picked up contact immediately when she returned, but their signs were ambivalent. They showed hostility near the positive affection. For example, they were kicking mom while hugging. They did not calm down, easily cried long, and were not able to turn back to play soon. They were clinging on mom. Avoidant, insecure children. They didn't even show the obvious signs of distress when the mother left. When the heartbeat, breath, and skin resistance were measured, it showed their unambiguous stress. When the mother returned, they did not pick up eye contact or body contact, but continued playing like nothing had happened. This test was conducted for cross-cultural comparison, basically with the same result everywhere. Interesting exceptions were the Bushman mothers, who were not willing to put down their babies in strained environment, even not for 3 minutes. Let's think about it. In our ancient past, if we put down the child for a minute alone, the smallest predator could take it. It is right to expect from our children today to stay put alone. The common essence, the instinct. The human ethology sees humanity as part of nature, subject of nature's laws, evolved through millions of years. Our body bears a sign of our history. For instance, our color vision is the product of the Diurno lifestyle. Our forward-looking eyes shaped in our tree-dwelling ages to assess the exact distance of branches. Our sweet preference probably derived from our fruit-eating past, when the nutritious food was ripe and sweet. On the analog of that, it is highly probable that all of the psychic experience that is important for our survival were somehow imprinted in our psyche. Maybe this is the point where the Jungian archetypes meet modern biology. All psychologists with psychodynamic point of view agree that the instincts have core influence on behavior. Jung was convinced that our assignment for our whole life is to explore, understand, and integrate our unconscious contents into our unconscious mind. He viewed it as the basis of psychic health and growing. Here we have our science, which makes a huge contribution to discover and explain our inherent characteristics. Let's use it to our advantage.